the experience of being a female and crossing a picket line is unlike anything else that I have ever experienced. And I mean, actually, even talking about this, I'm like reliving this. My heart starts thumping.
Hello, welcome to Life Is It Just Me, the podcast and YouTube series, although I don't really think I'm set up for YouTube today because my camera is refusing to work. So yeah, I'm Paul. We're here today to talk to Janice. Hey, Janice.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Ryan is here as always. Hi, Ryan.
As always. I feel like I'm not even like a host anymore. Like I've become the permanent second guest on my
At least
podcast.
On YouTube, we can see you. I'm just a blank screen. Or a picture, as it'll soon be. But hey,
I've upped my game. I've moved digs and everything.
You have. You're looking good. You're looking good. I'm jealous. You can't even see me. Maybe that's a good thing. All throughout this first season, we've been talking about the decision about whether or not to have children. Janice is here to talk to us today about huge part of her life, which we're going to delve into. Janice, set the scene for us. Tell us a bit about you.
I'm Canadian, so I live across the ocean from you, and I am a lone parent of a 10-year-old boy.
All right. How's it been? How's it been being a lone parent to a 10-year-old, especially during coronavirus?
Oh, it's very special during coronavirus.
I've got a 6-year-old and an almost 8-year-old, and that's very special too. Yeah,
it's a gift. I mean, actually, honestly, being a lone parent, I moved to Canada when he was 1. And so that's a really rocky time to try to establish a whole new life. So I opened a business and had to completely restart my social life. So I felt in many ways that I was actually really prepared for coronavirus because I haven't ever really had a huge amount of community support. So that which was ripped away from us, it wasn't like our entire whole world fell apart. That said, it's the relentless pace of it. I mean, parents all over the world, no matter what circumstance you're in, could talk about this. It just goes on and on and on and on. And, he has to go to school. He's distance educated. So it's been a period of a lot of intensity for us, as it has been for a lot of people in the world. But I think in a lot of ways we were well positioned for this because we've always had a great relationship. It's always kind of just been the two of us. And so removing kind of the rest of the world as a whole, in some ways, I've been training my whole life for this. In other ways, it has made this untenable scenario where like there's no, I always talk about the instant pot or the pressure cooker where you have that little bit of steam release. And I'm like, no, that doesn't exist anymore. Yes, the steam is staying inside the pot now.
I'm sure you're doing a great job. Janice, I want to take you back to, I guess, before you had your child, and part of the reason you're here to talk to us today is about you had a breakdown in your relationship with child's father, and it led you to a place where you were thinking about abortion. Take us through that journey, please.
Yes. So I was in a relationship, and as you put it very aptly, the relationship broke down. And I was in the early phases of pregnancy where termination was still an option. And it became abundantly evident that I was going to be in a scenario where I was going to be a single parent. And that is a very difficult scenario when it wasn't a planned pregnancy. So there are lots of people on this planet who are single mothers by choice. On some level, I do consider myself a single mother by choice because by the time I had my baby, I had gone through this major decision that we're about to talk about. But that wasn't the initial entry point into it. So I was in what a counselor Planned Parenthood called a decision that most women never want to have to make, where you don't want to move forward, you don't want to move backward. And it's just this moment of kind of being caught where you don't want to be a single parent, also don't want to have an abortion. So how do we move out of this scenario? Because we've already got a situation now where we have to make a decision one way or the other. We can't go back to that moment of neutrality.
Okay. Yeah, the way you put it, a decision that no one, I guess, in the right mind would ever see themselves in or want to be in. You were there. You then took the decision, or you were in the process of deciding to abort. Take us on that journey, please.
Yes, this was not a simple decision, and it took about 6 weeks to make, which in the scheme of my life and sitting here 10 years later, I'm like, oh, well, that's not really very long. But in the scheme of making a gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching decision like that was approximately the span of forever. So it's kind of seared into my memory. I was about 6 weeks along, which gave me 6 weeks. I was living in the United States at the time, so it gave me 6 weeks to the end of my first trimester, which under American morals, principles, laws, etc., that's kind of the last day that procedures of termination are undertaken with some level of, let's call it, for lack of a better word, ease, ethically, financially, etc. So I started going through fairly immediately when it became clear that I was in a scenario where I was going to have to either become a single mother or terminate the baby. I reached out to friends and first realized that I knew a lot of people who'd had abortions, and kind of what emerged from conversations with friends and my support network was that there was kind of two immediate reactions to finding out that we're pregnant. One is to say, oh my goodness, I didn't want this. Let's book in for a procedure on Monday or next available day. The second is to go through something of a process like I did. And it quickly became clear, and this is a generalization. There's individuals out there who have different experiences, but generally speaking, the people who immediately had that gut reaction of, no, I don't want this to happen, felt very settled. There was no sense of regret. And the second set really struggled with it and often regretted it and still had challenges processing it. And so with that in mind, I was not in the first camp where I recognized that I was pregnant and my first reaction was, I want to have an abortion. So that emotional weight of that made me realize fairly quickly that I actually needed to get some professional expertise. I was in over my head and recognized that I had friends who 10, 15, 20 years later still felt a little bit unsettled with it. So as I already mentioned, I was living in the United States, and there's an agency in the United States called Planned Parenthood, and they provide a lot of counseling services. So I went there, and it is also possible at Planned Parenthood to get abortions. So many Americans and North Americans really tie Planned Parenthood into, that's where you go to have abortions, but they also have top to bottom services to support the decision-making process. Okay. So I was assigned a counselor, and I went, I can't even tell you, but I feel like I probably went 6 times. And we talked 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 in circles. When I say we talked in circles, I talked in circles. Every time I went there, I felt this kind of condensing in my stomach. I felt really tight in my body. I didn't really actually want to be there. And, we had conversations about my age. I was 33 and I was going to be 34 by the time my child was born. We talked about my profession and my, one of the things I remember her saying was, if we were to give you back the life you had, is that something you would be satisfied with forever? And I knew that I wasn't going to be, because kind of that age range, you're moving out of those 20s, moving into a more mature lifestyle. And I already had those urgings to move my life forward, make some changes. Sure. We talked about whether I would ever want to have children. And there aren't answers to these things. So it wasn't like I was doing a multiple choice exam or a choose your own adventure where say yes to this and then this is the decision. So it was really, I ended up in this scenario, and I can't think of anything else in my life. I've made major life changes many, many, many times. And I've always kind of had this, I talk it through and then I get this flash of intuition and this moment of certainty. And, I've moved across the country 6 times, actually. I have changed careers 3 times. I have moved to a different country twice, and those things just happened. This one, I was stuck.
Not so much.
Not so much.
Not so much.
Right. And I mean, I remember calling a friend and saying, I go to bed at night just waiting for this decision to come like late, and it's not coming. So
what do you feel like, obviously being somebody who gets to a decision quite clearly, like you've just described, what kind of feelings do you go through when that isn't coming? Is there an anxiety, or can you explain just how you were feeling? Yeah.
Well, I was upset that I wasn't able to access that. And I felt like there was a level of despair, and it was a process of anxiety. And I think when I look back on it, I knew in my gut what I wanted to do. I didn't want that to be the answer. Because when I would go into the clinic, I would feel that tightening of my belly. And yet I didn't. So that says my body said, no, you don't actually want to have an abortion. And I think I actually even rationally knew that, but it was really hard for me to say, no, what I really want in my life is to be a single mom and a lone parent.
Yeah,
sure.
I suppose the way those scales are tipped, you're a little bit like, I can understand why you would be very much just in limbo. And I think it's
that because I was in limbo and I was trying to make my head and my heart and my gut line up, and it didn't, because the signals that my body were giving me and the signals my brain were giving me were at odds. So then I just hoped that if I kept talking about it and kept going through it with friends, that it would kind of line up. And then all that would happen is that blanket of despair would just kind of get a new layer on top. So it felt kind of, when you're laying in bed and you've got layers and layers and layers of blankets on, and then you kind of start sweating. That's kind of
I know that feeling very well.
Yeah.
Talk to us, Janice, about some of the external influences as well. We had a guest on recently, Olivia, who spoke to us. She had an abortion, and she spoke about some of the real pressures in the States. Did you feel anything similar?
I actually, yes and no. I am Canadian, and the general cultural environment in Canada, abortion was legalized in, I can't even tell you what year, but in the 70s, I guess. And it's just seen as a fundamental human right in Canada. That isn't the case in the United States. And
we found that in the chat that we had, sorry to cut you off, we found that that we were very surprised to see how almost old-fashioned that viewpoint is on the choice between pro-life and pro-choice, and how at odds they are in the States. Because obviously we live in Britain, we've got a different viewpoint again, and we said that we were a bit confused about how harsh people were viewing the whole thing, and we couldn't get from where we're from, and from the kind of help we get with the NHS and just the way our culture is here. It's obviously there is still pro-life and pro-choice people here, but it doesn't seem to be such a jarring. No, it doesn't seem to be the same level of theater as.
No, and so although I was making this decision in the United States, and I was at an American birth control / abortion clinic, I never felt once during that part of the process that there was any pressure. So I didn't feel like Planned Parenthood was pushing me one direction or the other. I never felt like anybody at that clinic had any agenda whatsoever. The agenda was, let's help you find what's right for you. I think that there probably were people in my environment who had a moral direction, but I think that more often than not, the people that I spoke to, in fact, the vast majority, were simply interested in helping me move through that decision, which quite frankly was painful. And that was evident when I was speaking about it. And it was evident to everybody who I did speak to that there was a big decision, and that I could see both sides of it. And I think that helped them see both sides of it and recognize it within themselves that this isn't just a black or white issue.
So it's not very clear cut. situation you were in. Do you still have any contact with the father?
I do not.
You do not.
I do not. There came a moment in the process which he was a part of for some period of that 6-week window when it became quite evident that we as a couple would no longer exist as a couple. And there was no possibility of moving through to the other side, no matter which decision I made. And so then that added another fun layer because
as if it wasn't hard enough.
Right, exactly. Then there was additional emotions, etc., layered on top. But it definitely moved from a we decision to a me decision.
Okay. And clearly you took the decision not to go through with the procedure. As we know, we spoke to your child just prior to coming on. How did you get there, and what was the process like?
Well, so as mentioned, I was waiting for that lightning bolt of intuition, that surety, that clarity, that moment when I was like, okay, I know what to do. And it never arrived. So the Planned Parenthood counselor recognized that we were basically talking in a circle at some level. We had covered every pro and every con and every emotion and every gut feeling and every rational feeling, and there was kind of nothing further because we had covered this territory several times. And so she was quite compassionate about it and said, I'm going to book you a procedure for the last day of your first trimester, and we're going to hope that having an actual appointment is going to help push you into that decision. I mean, the one thing about babies, it's not like jobs or homes or a lot of other things, purchasing a car. There isn't really a deadline. With babies, there's actual deadlines.
Quite clear cut.
Yeah, it's very clear cut.
There's actual deadlines, and also the baby's going to grow and eventually get born. So no matter what happened, there was going to be a
yeah, you have to make a choice. Yeah.
You have to make a choice. And so that last day of my first trimester arrived, and I woke up in the morning and I'm like, this is as it was yesterday. As the day before, I don't know any more today than I do yesterday. And I called my friend and I'm like, I literally don't ever even watch TV. Never. But that was my response. I'm like, I can't deal with this. I don't know what to do. Watch TV.
Don't speak to me. I'm an overload.
Exactly. I called my friend and she said, you're not going to make a decision watching TV. And I'm like, well, I don't know.
That's how I make decisions. That's how all my best decisions are made. I can believe that, knowing you.
There's value sometimes in it. So she was like, get dressed. And the Planned Parenthood clinic was a few blocks away from my house. It was walking distance from my house. She was like, get dressed and walk over there. I'm like, okay. In my head, I'm like, this is stupid, but fine. I mean, at this point, actually, if someone had told me to go swimming or to it wouldn't have mattered what someone told me to do. I would be like, okay.
You'd have done it.
I'm not making any more decisions. From now on, you make all my decisions. Sign me up for an improv class. Just yes.
Exactly. So I got dressed and I started walking, and the clinic, as mentioned, was really close to my house. I was living in New York, and like a lot of New Yorkers, I didn't own a car. So the particular corner where the clinic was a corner that I literally, for all the years I lived there, I walked by it at least twice a day on my way to work and on my way home from work. It's a very, nondescript building. Obviously, they're not going to call attention to it given the American politics around
It's
abortion.
not like Times Square with all the lights.
Exactly.
Get your tickets here.
Big sign, big arrow.
Right here. So actually, to be honest with you, I never even knew it was there until I had to access the service. And I was like, oh, that's, a couple blocks from my house. So I start walking towards the clinic, and I mean, actually, even talking about this, I'm like reliving this. My heart starts thumping. I got, on the same block, but I was on the opposite side of the street, and I realized there's protesters in front of the clinic. So there's a mass collection of men holding up signs with baby fetuses. And I literally kind of, you know, when you're walking and you just take that little step, that's not quite a step. My step faltered and I looked across the street and slowed down and saw them looking at me, and my breath caught.
Yeah. I can imagine. I wasn't there, and even I've got a fight or flight response at the moment. Me though, I would have just been like, I'm just catching a show. I'm just keep walking. We're going
on my way for a swim. Improv class. I don't know, but and so then we had that moment of recognition, and it's like being a snared rabbit where they can see me, I can see them, and I have a distinct recollection of feeling like I'd actually literally been kicked in the stomach. And I froze, and I'm like, okay. And I literally just started counting my breaths, like breathe in, breathe out. And
how do you do breathing again?
Was
how do you do breathing again? You just can't remember. Yeah.
I took everything I had, and what went through my head was, this is not how I'm going to make this decision. This is not how I'm going to make this decision.
Yeah, that's tough.
When you live in New York City, a chunk of your life is lived in public that would normally be in private spaces, because you live in 300 square foot spaces and you exist in this kind of high density living scenario. So I did something I'd done other periods of my public private life in New York City. I turned to face the opposite wall with the very childlike, beautiful New York, like, if I can't see them, they can't see me.
Yeah, the objects of impermanence is just like, no.
Exactly.
I'm not here.
Exactly. And so I literally started crying, and I'm not somebody who cries easily. It just was like this bodily response. And the only thing, when I think back to that, I mean, it was 10 years ago. It was over 10 years ago. And I can remember my heart. I can remember that feeling of that hit in the stomach, like you've been kicked. And I can just remember breathing. Okay, inhale. Okay, this is not how this is going down. Exhale. Inhale. Okay, you have to cross the street. Exhale. Inhale. You know, and it was, there's not a moment of my life where I can remember every single thought in that slow motion, and every single emotion in my body, and every single breath I took in. And I probably was facing that wall for 30 seconds. I really don't know, but I don't think it was a long time. So eventually I turned around, and then before we started recording this podcast, Paul was having problems with his camera.
Still am.
Right. And so we would hear his voice, and the camera was frozen, and then it went into fast motion. That's exactly what happened. So I turned around.
A badly dubbed movie. Good, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I turned around, and then my memory just speeds up. It's like, okay, we have to get through this mob of people.
Wow.
I don't know if I would have been as strong as you. I think I would have been like, I'm coming back tomorrow.
Yeah,
today is not that day.
It's fight or flight, isn't it?
Yep.
Well, what's interesting is, you know, how I mentioned that hit of intuition. It's interesting to me. I think some people could have interpreted that as, this is it. This is the sign. You wanted the sign. Here's the sign. Don't go into the sign. And instead, for whatever reason, the clarity of my thought was, this is not, no, like, I have spent 6 weeks mulling this over. Sure. Like, damn it, this is not what's happening. This
today is my day. How dare
this is not your decision.
And it was just, when I actually crossed the street and hit the sidewalk on the other side of the street, there is nothing on this planet like crossing a picket, an abortion line picket, where these people are shouting at you, they're pressing into you. They're not allowed to touch you, and no one did, but the signage right in my face with, you know, dead fetuses on them. And I remember thinking, like, you guys have no clue what I have gone through internally. You don't know what's going on in my life. And I just remember thinking,
you could have just been there to pick up a leaflet, for goodness sake. Like any other reason, you might not have been there.
Exactly. No, exactly.
Exactly.
There's people that go in there to get condoms. There's people that go in there to get pregnancy tests. They don't know actually why you're entering the clinic.
Exactly.
Maybe I probably, my tears probably gave me away.
Maybe a
I
little
think
bit.
being over crossing a picket line, these guys should have known they were going to cause that, though. I mean,
Maybe
oh my
that's part of the
goodness.
reason they're there.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they are there actively to stop people from coming into that clinic. And it is to try to stop people from getting an abortion because.
No, they're not there to stop people getting condoms. Clearly, they're.
No, exactly.
No,
Exactly.
sure.
And I have, this is jumping ahead, but subsequently, I have seen picketers outside of other clinics, and it literally takes me everything in my body not to stop my vehicle and get out and start shouting at these people, because the experience of being a female and crossing a picket line is unlike anything else that I have ever experienced. It is shaming. I felt like there was a lot of judgment and there was a lot of shaming, and it's also chaotic because I can't pick out in my memory particular words. Oddly, I can pick out signs that said stop on it, and I have no idea why I remember that. And I was trying to not look at any of them. So then it's also just kind of this loud shouting cacophony, not like a concert or something good, but where that anger.
Yeah, like a boo hiss kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're the bad guy in this in the stage show.
Yeah.
Honestly, you're stronger than me. I'm going to say that right now.
And it's because, especially in America, I mean, we touched on this a little bit, and no one on this call really fully understands it because none of us are American by culture. It's really linked to a sense of morality. So take a scenario in your life where you have been shamed for something that other people think is immoral, and amplify that to something where it's a difficult personal decision. And then people are putting this moral judgment on you and literally shoving it in your face. So they're taking what would be kind of that feverish nightmare, posting it on a poster, and then shouting it at you. And then you've got a mob of, I think that actually just the experience of being a female, no female ever is going to tell you that she's going to be super comfortable in a mob of angry men who are shouting at her.
No, I imagine not.
And then you amplify it by the moral judgment. And unfortunately, moral judgment around pregnancy always falls on the female. And it always falls to, how could you? Where did you fail? And there's two people involved in it. And the moment I stood there, those people knew nothing of my story. They didn't know how I got there. They didn't know all of the heartache. They didn't know all of the emotion and the intellect and the conversations and the support to get me to even be there.
Yeah, frankly, it doesn't sound like they care much. I mean, that's not their end goal. They're not trying. They're not trying to get to know you. They don't want to know what your reasoning is. No. They're there for one sole purpose.
No, exactly. But just imagine going through all that and then having somebody morally hiss at you, in a mob scenario.
Yeah, it sounds horrendous. It does. I can't even imagine.
So basically, to get to the clinic, you have to round a corner and go through a back door. And I finally passed all of these picketers and made it around the corner. And I remember my hand touching that cold metal door, yanking it open. And I literally, without exaggeration, fell on the floor. It took every strength in my body, every focus on, the entire focus was literally survive, get through the door. And once I was through the door, I had nothing left in my body, just straight down. Security literally picked me up off the floor.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know why this bothers me, but to this day, I'm like, the first thing that you have to do when you go into that particular clinic, or you did back in those days, was check in with security. Obviously, they've got, due to the nature of what happens in a portion of that clinic, lots of security. And so they actually take your photograph. So the first thing I had to do was check in, and they took a picture of me. And I'm
like, I'm not looking my best right now. I've just been through the gauntlet outside, and
I fell on the floor.
And fell on the floor. By
and
the way, somebody needs to mop down here. This is...
For whatever reason, actually, that did break that spell a little bit, because I was just like, I don't want my picture taken right now. Like, I'm crying, and I'm like, and I'm sure that they don't even see the photo, but it just struck me as like, you know, it actually added more humiliation to the insult of, like, this is the worst moment of my life, and now I have to stand here for a photo. Like, no one.
And now I have photographic evidence of the worst thing.
Exactly.
Thanks for that.
Exactly. So essentially, I was really shaken by that experience, and
as anyone would be.
I already described, like, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, my friend assured me that I'd make this decision on the way, and instead,
that works.
Right. And so I got into the clinic, and I'd actually forgotten even that I was supposed to be making a decision. So they were like, okay, here's your paperwork, fill it out. I'm like, okay, let me do it. I'm, kind of shaky and trying to collect myself. And then they send me one floor up, and I get an ultrasound, and I do that. And I was just like actually literally physically detached from what was happening. I was like, okay, well, I guess this is what is supposed to happen. So go ahead. Then they send me upstairs again. And that was where the clinical procedures took place. So the way that clinic operated, at least at that time, was that on that main floor there was counselors. They were randomly assigned, although when you got a counselor, that was the person who stayed with you. But then they would actually rotate through the clinic. So as it happened, the particular counselor who was upstairs just outside the procedure room happened to be the same person that had been my counselor downstairs.
Wow.
So it did make a huge difference, because I had the same person who had spent all these hours downstairs with me talking about this decision. And so she looked at me and said, I'm surprised to see you here today. And I said, yeah, me too. And then typically, I don't actually know what typically happens, but typically I think there is a bit of a counseling moment, just to ensure that people are not committing to a procedure due to duress or due to any kind of psychologically negative components. So they want people to really be of sound mind and body to make that decision, which is a good policy. So she said to me, we have gone through everything downstairs, so I need you to say the words, I am sure. So that apparently, again, I can't speak to today, but at that time, at that moment in that clinic, they needed, I am sure, 3 words. And I said, I don't think I can say that. And she goes, okay, I'm going to ask you again. And I said, I can't do it. It just like literally stopped. There was, even right now when I'm saying that, it's in my chest, and it just stops. That, I was this much. It stops right there. And I didn't actually start crying, but I felt like I would. And then she said, okay, we have an option we never talked about downstairs, and that's moving in the direction of giving the baby up for adoption. And that's true. We had never talked about that. We had only ever talked about kind of single mom abortion. And I took this deep breath, and I could feel my whole chest just fill with air. And that was the first time I had probably ever sat in that clinic through all those hours of counseling and everything that had ever happened, that I felt like I could actually breathe, because the whole rest of the time it was just this sense of constriction in my body.
Sure.
So she called an adoption agency and made an appointment for me to go that afternoon to talk to them. And I walked back down 3 flights of stairs and out the back door of the clinic and left. And that afternoon,
Did you say or left?
Left.
I laughed.
Left.
There was no laughing.
I didn't think so. I thought
No,
that
no,
doesn't
Paul.
seem
You picked
appropriate.
that up wrong.
Apologies.
Yeah.
That was the accent. My apologies.
No, in
I might
fact,
edit that out.
in fact, I
Leave
will
that
tell
in.
you-
We people need to know how stupid you are sometimes.
Apologies. Carry on, please. Excuse my lack of professionalism.
No, it's okay. You may find this amusing because I actually do when I think back and I'm like, oh goodness. I actually, the whole way home, I was really upset. In fact, I started crying because I was like, oh my God, like I had one thing on my to-do list today and I couldn't do it.
That's not amusing at all. Sorry, no.
Absolute failure.
Like, oh my
That will
God.
appeal to Paul because he's a list maker and he definitely ticks things off the
Yeah.
list. He even has
Right?
post-it notes.
Janice, I'm like you. You said you never watched TV. You said you're very regimented. All those things resonate with me. So I know, I almost know what you mean. I haven't been in that situation clearly, but almost a sense of this was the goal for today, and it hasn't been achieved. Yeah,
A to-do list. You've been in that situation
Oh,
before. Definitely, Paul.
if our camera worked, I would show you.
It was one of those things where like, okay, like that's a highly irrational thought, quite obviously, but I remember thinking that and being really upset but I also felt like, okay, thank God, like this is over. I don't have to we're done. So as mentioned, I didn't have a car in New York City. I was a bike commuter. So that afternoon, and it was hot. It was a hot day in New York City. I rode my bike 91 blocks, literally up a hill to go to this adoption agency, stepped inside and just noticed my body didn't feel the same as it had in Planned Parenthood. And we went through all of the, adoption procedures. And what I remember most of all was she showed me binders of families who were looking to adopt babies. And I was really taken aback because there was women just 4 years older than me seeking to adopt a baby. And to this day, that isn't why I made that decision. It's not why I ended up keeping my child. It just really stood out to me as, that could be me.
Sure.
It could have been me. It wasn't what I had in my mind as the profile of somebody who would be adopting a baby. And, I feel a bit bad. I ended up totally ghosting the adoption agency. Like they called me, follow up. Like,
Don't call me, I'll call you.
Yeah. But what I really took away was, just that sensation in my body was like, okay, I put down the gauntlet. I don't need to, this wasn't the life path that I wanted, but my body was actually sending me those signals all along that I didn't want to have an abortion. And when given another option, I felt like that was okay. And I thought the whole time when I was pregnant, I mean, I ghosted them, but it would have been fine with me to actually move through that whole pregnancy and give the baby up for adoption. And there's no rational reason for it. I never could come up with ration, which is what I was trying to do for those whole 6 weeks. And the only rational moment of that entire 6 weeks was the moment when I thought, I am not going to make a decision because these protesters are across the street.
Sure.
Which makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
And to this day, I mean, I know it's not about that, but I think that there's a whole narrative that the protesters truly believe that they're there to help. And what I can say is not one of those men has ever helped me. No agency that's ever pro-life has ever helped me. There has been no benefit from any pro-life protester, agency, group, or anyone affiliated with anything that's pro-life that has ever helped me or volunteered to help me. No. And so it's a really huge disconnect where they're outside these agencies with this voracious message. And I think that it is well-meaning. And I think that they have a lot of moral belief in what they're saying, but then they're not actually standing behind those words, because there's a lot of women who end up in my position who then, we raise our children alone. And there's that very community that's saying this is right and it's the right choice. Where are they now? And to be clear, like I never thought that they were going to come save me or help me. That wasn't my scenario. but it makes me sick in my stomach to think that they could influence somebody who hoped for that.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of resonates with me a little bit, because I feel that doesn't make sense to me. Like, if these people want to get involved about something that's not going to affect them in any way, and we've had this conversation on this podcast a few times now, not about abortion, but other decisions and the way that people treat other people that have no investment in their lives whatsoever.
About remaining child-free, for example, that
was one that was somebody was like shouted at in a supermarket because they wanted to be child-free by some random lady, and like has like Seriously? Why has that got anything to do with you?
Yeah, it's true.
So, I mean, we try to stay as impartial as possible with this and not judge. But in that scenario, if I was being attacked in the middle of a supermarket for any reason, I'd be like, oh, what is going on here? This is crazy.
It made me a little bit judgy. Well, a lot judgy, actually, about protesters, because I've had the experience of actually crossing that line. And, I want to kind of put some parentheses around that. I was in my 30s. I was a professional, educated woman. I'm white, and I'm coming from what arguably is some level of privilege with those very things. And so to be in a much more vulnerable position than I am is, I think that it did make me feel very judgy towards them, because I had the strength and the conviction and the intelligence and the education and kind of even, we the whole world's been talking about white privilege this year, but really I have that too. And I could walk across the street and pass them, and that was not easy for me. So I cannot imagine being a 16-year-old Black girl, or I cannot imagine being somebody who didn't come from a supportive family. I can't.
Any teenager, though, I can't imagine any teenager being in that situation. Nope. And obviously you didn't have a positive experience, but how they would think that is a positive thing for anybody. I just don't understand it.
No. So you are right to be very open-minded and not judgmental, but because I've had that experience firsthand, I am judgmental. So, I remember driving.
We can't blame you for that. I understand that as well. Yeah,
I remember driving by an abortion clinic in Canada 2 summers ago and seeing protesters out, and it was like one of those, almost cartoonish, like hold me back moments. Like, don't go out there, don't get involved in that, don't say what you want to say, because I would have actually been very confrontational, because it's not okay for me to see that.
Yeah,
Janice, thank you so much. I know we're short for time, so I want to say a massive thank you for coming on and speaking to us so openly and passionately and honestly. And like we always say on the show, we hope that if one person listening to this can take something away from it, benefits from it, then that's enough for us. That's what we ask for. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Ryan. Thanks for checking out Life Is It Just Me? Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and also on YouTube for the video version. And come over and check out our website, which is lifeisitjust.me, for all our latest info and updates. And thanks again. We'll see you soon.